All right, today we're going to take a little trip back in time to explore a language teaching method that pretty much defined classrooms for centuries. And you know what? It might even feel a little bit familiar. So let's dive in. So, have you ever been in a language class where it felt like you spent all your time just memorizing verb charts and translating these really complicated sentences, but you barely ever spoke a single word out loud? Yeah, if that sounds familiar, you've probably had a taste of the method we're talking about today. Well, that feeling you had, that this is a puzzle, not a language feeling, it's got a name: the grammar translation method. For centuries, this was the standard way to teach, and really, understanding it helps us see just how far language teaching has come. At its heart, it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. No hidden meanings here. You learn the grammar rules, and then you practice by translating. The whole focus is just on going back and forth between your language and the one you're learning, mostly through written texts. It also has another name, the classical method, and that gives us a huge clue about where it came from. See, this method wasn't designed for, tourists trying to order a coffee in Paris. Nope. It was first used to teach classical languages like Latin and Greek, which people study to read literature and for the intellectual challenge, not for chatting. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. The whole philosophy behind it. The core belief was that the purest, the best form of a language was found in its great works of literature. Everyday spoken language, that was seen as kind of secondary, less important. So success wasn't about whether you could hold a conversation. It was all about how well you could translate a really tough piece of text. And that leads us to a really, really crucial point. The goals of this method were just completely different from what most of us think about when we sign up for a language class today. Becoming fluent in conversation, that was never, ever the point. The number one goal, the top of the pyramid, was to be able to read literature in its original language. Everything else was just a step to get there. Mastering grammar and vocabulary, that was just to help you read the literature. And get this, learning the language was also seen as a workout for your brain, kind of like studying math. It was all about training your mind. So, as you can probably imagine, this whole philosophy created a very specific, and I mean very rigid, classroom environment. The roles for the teacher and the students were crystal clear. There was absolutely no gray area. And yeah, this table pretty much says it all, doesn't it? The teacher is the authority, the absolute expert, the source of all knowledge. They explain the rules, they give you the right answers. And the students? Well, their job is just to listen, to soak it all in, and to follow directions. They're basically passive receivers of information, and you're not going to see a lot of students talking to each other. Okay, so what did this actually look like day to day? Let's imagine we're stepping inside a typical grammar translation classroom to see how a lesson would actually play out. The main event, this centerpiece of almost every single lesson, was translating a piece of literature. Students would get a text from some famous author in the language they're learning, and their big task was to translate it sentence by sentence back into their own native language. So grammar was taught deductively. What does that mean? Well, basically, it's a top-down approach. The teacher starts by just telling you the rule, flat out. Like, here's how you form the past tense. Then you have to memorize that rule and all its exceptions, and finally, you practice it in different exercises and drills. But it wasn't just translation. Oh no. A typical lesson was jam-packed with all sorts of drills to hammer those rules into your brain. You'd be answering questions about the text, finding words that meant the opposite or the same, and of course, memorizing long, long lists of vocabulary words. You know the drill, right? The classic fill-in-the-blanks exercise. You get a sentence with a word missing, you've just learned a new grammar rule or a new set of words, and your job is to stick the right one in the blank. It's a straight-up test of your memory and whether you can apply the rule correctly. And here's a really critical point. Accuracy was everything. There was just no room for creative mistakes or kind of getting the gist of something. If you made a mistake, the teacher would correct it immediately, right then and there, or call on another student to give the perfect answer. The goal was to get it right, period. So you might be thinking, if this method was so dominant for so long, why'd we move on? Why don't we still use it? Well, its legacy is complicated, and its weaknesses just became impossible to ignore once the whole world's goals for learning languages started to change. This balance sheet here really breaks it down perfectly. I mean, on the one hand, this method is fantastic for building really strong reading and writing skills. You get a super deep analytical understanding of grammar. But the flip side is huge. It almost completely ignores speaking and listening. Students could become these brilliant translators, but then be totally unable to hold even a simple conversation. When you boil it all down, the grammar translation method treated language less like a living, breathing thing for communication and more like a complex code that needed to be cracked. It was an intellectual puzzle, right? And the prize wasn't connecting with other people, it was understanding great literature. And that kind of leaves us with a big question to chew on. When you're learning a language, what's the real goal? Is it to analyze it perfectly? Or is it to communicate, even if it's imperfectly? You know, the answer to that question really defines your whole approach to learning, and it's why things have changed so much over time. What do you think?